You're endangering other children by keeping formula like that in public view. Petra Allridge, president of the Stonewood Preserve HOA, stood at the edge of my porch, arms folded like a judge who'd already passed sentence. Her laminated ID badge swayed gently in the breeze, catching a glint of sunlight off the plastic like it meant something. In one hand, she held an HOA violation slip. In the other, she pointed toward my son's bottle, resting on the porch table beside the willow cradle. "You're distributing visual toxins," she added flatly. "Synthetic brands normalize unsafe feeding behaviors." My newborn son, Galen, squirmed lightly in his cradle just as the first choking sound escaped him. One short gasp, then another. My eyes snapped toward him. His lips had turned a shade too pale. I didn't wait to argue. I dropped the violation notice and lunged toward the cradle, scooping him up with one arm and tipping him slightly forward in case he was aspirating. His eyes fluttered. Something was wrong. I looked at the bottle, still upright, still capped, and yanked it close. The seal was broken, not cracked, peeled. Petra didn't flinch. "You left it unattended. We reserve the right to issue a food safety citation." "You really want to do this, Petra?" I said, locking eyes with her. "Because that bottle sits under a tri-axis microlens, with server pings every 3 seconds. She blinked for the first time, just once. That cradle, woven from raw willow strands and reinforced with thermal sensors, wasn't just for comfort. It was a sealed data zone. I designed the camera network myself, wired it into the subfloor before Galen was born. She didn't know that, and neither did the others. If you're a parent, especially one who's been through loss, subscribe now. Because what happens next is exactly what happens when people with just enough power forget your child is a human being, not a checkbox. I will never forget this day. And if you stick with me, you won't either. I'm Lorian Graff. I build the forensic tech that verifies audio and video integrity in courtrooms, military ops, and wrongful conviction appeals. My work shows up in cases with names, headlines, confessions. I don't scare easy. But I'd never seen someone violate sacred ground like this before. Petra didn't just hand me a citation. She stepped over my son's threshold, the same wooden planks I built with my wife before she died, delivering Galen 7 months ago. This porch wasn't just property. It was all that remained of the life we had before Stonewood Preserve decided it could legislate grief, fatherhood, and formula. Petra thought she was saving the neighborhood from a plastic bottle, but she didn't ask what it took for Galen to drink anything at all. He was born underweight, jaundiced. For weeks we fed him in drops. The formula brand she called visual toxin. It was the only thing that didn't make him vomit. Blood. My late wife, Marianne, was a pediatric nutritionist. That brand was her final choice, final recommendation, final instruction, etched in her medical file when she signed the DNR. Petra didn't know any of that. Or maybe she didn't care. She certainly didn't look concerned when I turned to her holding my half-breathing son in my arms. "You can't tamper with personal medical items," I said. "That's a felony." She shrugged. HOA regulations supersede neighborhood comfort levels. If a neighbor reports unsafe materials, we are entitled to intervene. I wasn't sure what sickened me more, the lie or the confidence with which she said it. Inside the house, the central server blinked green. That meant the bottle's microlens had already uploaded its last 30 seconds. Petra didn't know she'd been recorded from the second she stepped onto the porch, but she would. Because if anything in that bottle harmed my son, I'd make sure she never held another policy meeting again. Welcome to Stonewood Preserve, where natural living means a stranger with a badge thinks she knows better than a father with a cradle, and where my baby, Galen, had just become the newest casualty of suburban control. This wasn't a dispute. This was war. The emergency room lights were too bright, too sterile, too loud. Galen's tiny frame disappeared under a web of sensors and blinking leads, his skin tinged with the faintest blue. A nurse pushed a clear tube down his throat, while a resident murmured about suspicious alkaloid exposure. My fists clenched, numb from holding him during the drive. Petra's voice still echoed behind my ears. Visual toxins. By the time they stabilized him, the toxicology screen had already picked up markers for pyrrolizidine alkaloids, commonly found in unregulated herbal supplements. Comfrey extract, pennyroyal, both illegal for infants, both deadly in the wrong dose. The bottle hadn't been tampered with during transit. That meant it happened on my porch. Petra Allridge had introduced poison to my son's body, and she was probably sitting on her porch right now sipping tea like nothing happened. I drove home with shaking hands and rage building beneath my ribs. By the time I reached the house, the sun had set. The willow cradle sat under the porch lamp, still swaying slightly from earlier. I walked past it without a word and went straight to the server room. I designed my system years ago to pass federal admissibility standards. Every camera had a checksum. Every motion-triggered recording synced to the microsecond. The lens above Galen's cradle, no larger than a match head, fed directly into the cradle's rail and stored clips locally before transmission. It took me less than 5 minutes to find it. 3:11:47 p.m. Petra's hand entered frame holding a beige cloth tote. 3:11:52. She looked around, placed her clipboard over the bottle I'd left warming on the table, then reached inside her. Bag. Out came a matching bottle. Slightly different cap. Label obscured. She placed it down, adjusted the positioning, lifted the original bottle, and tucked it into her tote, covered by a folded flyer. By 3:12:14, she was walking back down the steps. There was no hesitation in her posture, no confusion, no accident. Just the cold, mechanical precision of someone who believed they were right and would never be caught. But she was wrong, and I had her on 4K, infrared-enhanced, server-sealed video. My hands shook, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't a neighbor dispute anymore. This was criminal. I exported the footage with an authentication chain and wrote down the hash for legal submission. I didn't call the police, not yet. I needed to move smarter. Petra was calculating, and the HOA board wouldn't hesitate to cover for her. If I went in without a bulletproof record trail, they'd spin it like I fabricated the video myself. But here's the thing, I train federal agencies on how to spot forgeries, and I build the tools to prove what's real. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the bottle Petra had left behind. It sat inside a sealed evidence bag now, marked with today's date. I'd already run a preliminary scan for external contamination. None. That meant she had replaced the entire contents. I opened the HOA community app on my phone, where Petra regularly posted health bulletins. The most recent entry was from 3 days ago. A warning about community endangering formulas, advising all parents to consult natural alternatives such as detoxifying root extracts for newborn digestion issues. The post had 3 likes. I recognized the usernames, all board members. There it was again, that pattern. Petra wasn't acting alone. She had supporters, a system, a rhythm. And if I'd looked a little harder before now, I would have seen it sooner. She'd already poisoned this neighborhood with fear. What she did to Galen was just the first time someone fought back. But someone else had to know. Someone on that board had to have seen it, heard it, maybe even regretted it. I needed one crack in her armor. The name came to me as I scrolled further. Norlin Vex, HOA Vice President. Rarely posted, never commented, but always present at board meetings. Former health inspector, retired 5 years ago. I remembered once hearing him hesitate when Petra proposed banning home humidifiers. Said something about informed consent before falling silent. He was my crack, and I was going to split it wide open. Norlin Vex lived in the last house on Ashfern Circle, a weathered brick ranch with rusting wind chimes and sun-bleached trellises that hadn't seen a rose in years. The place looked out of sync with the rest of Stonewood Preserve, which prided itself on manicured hedges and bi-weekly mulch inspections. His lawn hadn't been HOA compliant in at least a year. I walked up the uneven stone path with the footage drive in my pocket and the bottle in an evidence bag tucked under my jacket. My son was still in the hospital, recovering from something he couldn't even name yet, and I needed someone to stop pretending they hadn't seen what Petra was turning this neighborhood into. The door creaked open before I knocked. Norlin stood in a cardigan that looked 2 sizes too large, holding a mug that read, "World's Okayest Vice President." His eyebrows were unruly, his gaze unsure. When he recognized me, his mouth tightened like he'd swallowed something bitter. I figured it was only a matter of time, he muttered, stepping aside without invitation. "Come in." His living room smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The walls were lined with stacked file boxes, but not the chaotic kind, labeled, sorted, dated. His television was still playing closed-caption news reruns, not muted, just quiet enough to ignore. "I saw what Petra did," I said, bypassing pleasantries. "On my porch, to my son." He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaled through his nose, and lowered himself onto a creaky recliner that let out a slow wheeze beneath his weight. "You have footage?" "I design surveillance verification systems for federal courts. Yes, I have footage. It's already hashed, duplicated, and under remote lock." He nodded once, like he'd already assumed that part. I set the evidence bag on the coffee table. The bottle inside looked ordinary, no different from what you'd see in any family kitchen. But we both knew it wasn't. "She used pyrrolizidine alkaloids," I continued. "Hospital-confirmed liver stress within an hour of intake. If they hadn't flushed his system immediately, he'd have gone into full failure." Norland didn't ask how I knew that. He just stared at the bottle. "I need to know what you've seen," I said. "What you've heard, anything she said off the record, anything you've documented." He looked over at one of the file boxes near the wall. His fingers curled around the handle of his mug. "I kept minutes," he said quietly. "Not the sanitized ones Petra distributes. I keep the actual minutes, unfiltered, for my own conscience." "And why haven't you done anything?" Norland's eyes finally met mine. There was no anger there, just exhaustion. "Because Petra's not just a tyrant with a badge. She's calculating, strategic. She isolates dissidents, frames them as unstable, calls surprise wellness checks, sends citations for invisible violations. I've watched 3 board members resign in the last year. 2 moved, 1 went into assisted care. And you?" I took notes and kept quiet. The shame hung between us like damp fabric. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "She poisoned an infant, Norland." "I know." "Then say it out loud." "She poisoned an infant," he whispered, "and I helped create the environment that made her believe she could." He stood slowly, walked to the wall, and pulled out a ledger-sized binder from a box marked Policy Drafts, unfiled. Inside were pages of meeting logs written in uneven cursive. His notes were meticulous, Petra's exact phrases, annotated reactions from other board members, timestamps. He opened to a page dated 3 months ago. She floated the idea of creating a natural wellness campaign targeting formula-fed infants, said the HOA should lead by example in protecting the immune development of newborns. I laughed. Thought it was a joke. She didn't. He traced a finger along the page. Later that week, she updated the bulletin board herself. No vote, just pinned it up. The same language. I stayed silent. "You're not staying silent anymore." His hand trembled as he handed me the binder. "She'll retaliate," he said. "So be it." His voice cracked on the way out. "She used to talk about building a utopia," he said. "But this isn't one. It's a cult of one." I nodded once, and now we were going to burn her altar down. The next morning, the violation notice on my front door had multiplied. Where there had been 1 flimsy slip before, now there were 6, each printed on heavier cardstock, laminated and zip-tied to the door handle like warning tags on condemned machinery. Non-compliant infant feeding materials, obstruction of community wellness initiatives, and one with the boldest letters of all, hostile conduct toward HOA authority. It wasn't just posturing anymore. Petra was escalating. Inside, I had to remind myself to breathe. Galen was still at the hospital, monitored but stable. The doctors expected a full recovery, but with liver markers that would need watching for months, maybe years. I'd barely slept, but sleep didn't matter now. Petra was trying to isolate me, bury me in false accusations before I could act. I scanned each tag. None of them bore the HOA board's full signatures, just Petra's initials and the vague mention of emergency board authority. No date of issuance, no meeting record, no appeal instructions, not legal, not enforceable, and not going to stop me. I took photos of each one with metadata-stamped capture software. Petra liked playing games with paper, but I played in packets and digital trails. I uploaded the images into my incident log, then opened the HOA's internal community platform and navigated to the new wellness enforcement section Petra had quietly created. There it was, an official post from her, time-stamped 3:09 a.m., titled, "Protecting Our Future, HOA, Response to Infant Health Threats." She had the gall to claim that unnamed residents had endangered others by introducing corporate feeding toxins into Stonewood Preserve, and that the board had unanimously approved emergency oversight procedures. Unanimously? Norlin hadn't signed off on anything, and I had the logs to prove it. That was her mistake. She thought a quiet man, like Norlin, wouldn't talk, that I was just a panicked parent, that no one would check timestamps or track file hashes. But I was done responding. I was preparing. Petra's violations weren't just harassment. They were attempts to falsify legal standing. If I could show that she acted unilaterally, without board approval, and had lied about it in writing, I could destroy her credibility, maybe more. I opened my workstation and imported Norlin's handwritten ledger into OCR software. His notes from the past 6 months parsed out into clean, time-stamped entries. I cross-checked every major wellness bulletin Petra had posted against Norlin's meeting logs. There were discrepancies in at least 9 instances. Bulletins Petra claimed were voted on had no corresponding meeting notes. Some had been distributed during canceled sessions. She'd forged consent. That was my opening. While the software ran comparisons, I started building a chronological evidence tree. Petra's bulletin timestamps matched against the video footage, Norlin's notes, and the HOA's own digital platform logs. Every data point led back to her unilateral decisions. And the most damning was the bottle footage. I hadn't told anyone outside of Norlin about that yet, but that would come. I wanted Petra trapped not by one act, but by her entire system. A ping broke the silence. An email. No subject line. Just a PDF attachment titled Community Health Enforcement Plan. I opened it. It was Petra's latest draft policy, dated and time-stamped just that morning. It outlined protocols for interim removal of health hazard residents, including authorizing wellness entry checks in emergencies. The language was manipulative, careful, almost legal-sounding, but it wasn't legal. It wasn't voted on. And it was aimed directly at me. She was preparing to remove me from my own home. I copied the file to my server, printed a copy, and folded it slowly. My hands didn't shake this time. Let her come. Because now I wasn't just reacting. I was documenting. And when the time came, I'd bury her beneath her own paper trail. The hospital smelled different after the 3rd day. Less like antiseptic, more like limbo. Galen's room was tucked at the end of the pediatric wing, where the monitors beeped soft lullabies of dread. I stood beside his crib while a nurse explained the lab results. The compound was confirmed. Unregulated comfrey root concentrate, high enough to damage the liver of a full-grown adult, let alone a newborn. Was it accidental exposure? She asked gently, like she already knew it wasn't. No, I said. It was planted. I had the footage, the ledger, the fake policies. But I didn't have what I needed most. A match between Petra's concoction and the actual contents of the bottle. Without that, she could still claim the video was misinterpreted, that I was retaliating over a neighborhood dispute. So, I made a call. Dr. Nima Reyes had worked with me on a state forensic audit project last year, authenticating toxin sources in tampering cases. She ran a private lab now, independent from hospital or police oversight. She owed me a favor. I sent her the sealed bottle with chain of custody documentation and my initial scan results. By nightfall, she confirmed what I suspected. Not just comfrey, she said over the phone. There's marsh pennywort in it, wild harvested, not commercially processed. Both have liver-toxic compounds. Together, it's like feeding your kid a chemical landmine. This wasn't an accident. And origin? There's a trace of birch pollen that's local to this region. Whoever made this grew or prepared it within 20 miles. That sealed it. Petra's fingerprints were all over the formula, even if she didn't touch it directly. She'd posted about these detox recipes in archived HOA wellness forums months ago. I still had the screenshots. Now I had the science to back it. I hung up and sat in the chair beside Galen's crib. His chest rose and fell in shallow, steady waves. The IV line hummed. Petra didn't just try to punish me. She tried to cleanse my child of everything she didn't approve of. And now I had forensic proof she crossed the line between ideology and felony. But it wasn't time to strike. Not yet. First, I needed to ensure that nothing I submitted could be dismissed as hearsay. I needed one more layer. Verification that her health campaigns weren't rogue ideas, but systematized tactics pushed through the HOA as policy. and for that, I had to dive deeper into the very platform she'd created. Back home, I accessed the HOA's private admin dashboard. Months ago, Petra had asked the board to approve a wellness oversight database, a cloud-based portal where board members could log health interventions, complaints, and unofficial guidance. It was supposed to be optional, informational. It turned out to be a playbook. I logged in using a temporary proxy that masked my IP and navigated to the back-end file tree. Buried in a hidden directory was a folder named Parent Resource Expansion. Inside were PDFs, dated as early as January. One was titled Infant Protocol V3. Another, Bottle Label Visual Markers, Community Deviation Draft. The language was chilling. Terms like chemical parent normalization, formula inversion tactics, and reactionary compliance pushback weren't medical. They were manipulative. And in the footer of each document, authored by Petra Ulrich. Status: internal draft. Awaiting Norlin. Yive review. Except Norlin had never reviewed them. I knew that now. The folder contained tracking logs too. One of the documents had been opened the day Galen got sick. Timestamp: 2:57 p.m. 14 minutes before Petra walked onto my porch. She hadn't just acted on ideology. She'd followed her own script. I took screenshots of the server metadata and downloaded copies. I cross-referenced each one against the policy updates in the official HOA forums. Several phrases matched word for word. She'd published polished versions after every quiet trial she ran. This was no longer about one poison bottle. It was a pattern, an orchestrated one. I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, because I wouldn't. I watched the server feeds all night, eyes scanning for motion triggers near the porch, the garage, the cradle. Nothing moved but the wind. By dawn, I was dressed and back in my office, every light off except the one above the keyboard. Petra's playbook was open on my second monitor. The file names alone sounded more like a black site protocol than anything appropriate for a neighborhood HOA. Behavior conditioning. Phase 1, parental resistance scenarios, supplement substitution matrix. This wasn't just overreach. It was an engineered behavioral control system dressed up in natural wellness language. She had steps, scripts, response trees for every kind of pushback. And according to the back-end logs, she'd deployed some form of intervention on at least 5 other families. I checked the names. One of them was the McCarthys, 2 streets over. Their daughter had gone to the ER for respiratory distress last spring. Rumors swirled then about mold or tainted humidifiers. Petra had posted a bulletin a day later, warning residents about chemical dispersal via vapor-based devices. Now it clicked. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a trial run. I cross-referenced another name, Elena Duval. Her baby was born premature. Petra visited them personally, handing out homemade digestive teas. Elena's husband mentioned it in passing at a community meeting. A week later, the baby developed unexplained intestinal inflammation. The HOA blamed the formula. The Duvals quietly moved out 2 months later. Petra had done this before. Galen wasn't the first, but he would be the last. The urgency crystallized then. I wasn't just defending my son anymore. I was dismantling something systemic, something cult-like that had been hiding behind garden club smiles and laminated citations. I needed to go public, not viral, not yet. Public, controlled, precise. I packed everything into a single encrypted drive. The full bottle swap footage, chain of custody proof for the poison formula, Norlin's handwritten logs with matching OCR transcripts, Dr. Reyes's toxicology report, metadata from Petra's private folder, server activity logs confirming the intervention plan. I named the archive Stonewood Proof Set Final. But I didn't send it anywhere, not yet, because if I released it now, Petra would deny, spin, bury it under red tape. She had influence, reputation, and a disturbing level of control over board messaging. I needed her to walk directly into her own lie first, to confirm, in her own words, that she believed what she was doing was policy. I needed a trap. I logged back into the HOA platform and drafted a fake resident inquiry from a burner account I'd created during my review of the system, one Petra hadn't flagged yet. The message was short. Dear Petra, we are concerned about the increasing formula use in Units 18 and 22. We noticed the baby in Unit 31 may have resumed use of non-HOA compliant bottles. Are we allowed to step in again? Please advise. Concerned, neighbor. 12. I hit send and waited. She replied in 9 minutes flat. Absolutely. You are authorized to conduct a gentle inquiry or deliver one of the supplement alternatives kits. If a swap can occur during distraction, that is ideal. Our guidelines remain consistent. She included a link to the exact same substitution matrix file I had already downloaded. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched. It was all there. She wasn't improvising. She was operationalizing. I immediately flagged the message chain, screen captured it with metadata stamps, and added it to the archive. This one was different, not just evidence. It was intent, her own written words endorsing covert intervention on another child's nutrition plan. That's when it became clear. This wasn't just about HOA abuse. It bordered on medical impersonation, endangerment, and coordinated civil conspiracy. The trap had worked. Petra didn't suspect a thing. And now I had her admitting it. Again. Norland's hand shook as he poured coffee into a chipped mug that read, "Retired, not expired." It sloshed over the side, landing in a thin brown ring on his countertop. He didn't notice. "I read the message you sent through the platform," he said finally, eyes flicking toward the laptop I'd placed between us. "You used the burner, just like I suggested, but I didn't think she'd fall for it that fast." "She's comfortable," I said. "She's done it before." Norland exhaled and leaned on the edge of the counter like it took everything he had to stay upright. "She trusts the system because she built it, not just the files, the people, the fear. This whole neighborhood learned to flinch when Petra knocks." He looked older than he had a week ago, or maybe it was just the light casting long shadows under his eyes. "I want to help," he said, finally meeting my gaze. "For real this time, not with quiet minutes and whispers. I want her gone." I slid the encrypted drive across the counter. "I need you to bring this to someone who'll take it seriously. Outside the HOA, outside the neighborhood. Someone who doesn't care if Petra has local friends." He tapped the metal edge. "What's on it?" "Everything. Footage, logs, her platform messages, even her wellness playbooks. I've arranged the files in an admissible timeline. You'll see a folder labeled Trigger Evidence. That's what they'll need to act fast." Norland nodded slowly. "There's someone I used to work with, county investigator. Quiet guy, but he has pull, and he hates anyone pretending to be more official than they are. Perfect. I'll need to say where it came from. Say it came from both of us." His eyes widened slightly. "That'll make me a witness." "That's exactly what you are." He closed the drive in his palm like it was made of glass. "She's going to implode when this hits. You know that, right? If she gets even a hint, she already suspects something. That's why she sent out those laminated violations last week." Norland let out a sound between a chuckle and a groan. "Laminated, like she wanted them to survive a hurricane." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he stood and walked to a filing cabinet near his hallway, one I hadn't seen before. He turned a key and pulled out a folder marked Board History 2021. Inside were printouts of emails, early wellness drafts, and a signed memo Petra had submitted 2 years ago requesting expanded authority in emergency biological scenarios. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because if you want to collapse our empire," Norland said, "you don't just need the horror, you need the evolution, proof she's been pushing this agenda for years, not just one mistake. If you can show this was calculated, patterned, and allowed by silence, then it becomes something bigger than a neighborhood scandal." He handed me the folder. "Take it, scan it, layer it into your archive. You'll see the escalation." I accepted it with a nod. "You're not afraid anymore." "I'm still afraid," he said. "I'm just more afraid of doing nothing now." He opened his drawer and took out an old flip phone. "This is clean, not connected to any HOA channels. I'll call my contact in an hour. You'll hear from him soon." As I turned to leave, Norland said one more thing, softly, like he wasn't even sure he meant to say it out loud. "I watched Petra change after her license got pulled, like she had to find somewhere else to control people, and we handed her the keys. You're taking them back now." He gave a single nod, then closed the drive in a padded envelope. As I stepped back into the sunlight, the neighborhood felt different. The yards were still trimmed. The air still smelled faintly of cedar mulch. But for the first time since Galen's scream, I felt a shift. Not in what Petra had done, in what we were about to undo. The scanner beeped softly as page after page of Norland's folder passed beneath the glass. His archived memos stretched back further than I expected. Petra's first health sovereignty proposal was written in pencil on a yellow legal pad before she'd even joined the HOA board. She had been laying groundwork long before she ever touched a badge. The oldest drafts were milder, suggestions about community herb gardens and food-sharing protocols. But even then, she used the same phrasing she used now: eliminating synthetic interferences, correcting parental programming, long-term immunity shaping. This wasn't new behavior, it was doctrine. With Norland's files layered into the timeline, the proof set had become something airtight, more than just a report of poisoning. It was a detailed map of intent, escalation, concealment, and now, exposure. But it wasn't finished. I added a forensic watermark to each file and generated an immutable time chain. The archive now had a hash trail leading back to the moment Petra touched the bottle. It wouldn't just hold up in court, it would force a courtroom into existence. My part was almost done. Now I needed to bait her into confirming in public that she believed her actions were policy, not individual error. Because the second she positioned her behavior as HOA approved, every board member who hadn't signed off on her drafts became a witness, and every document she faked became perjury in waiting. I called an emergency request for public review under Section 14B of the Stonewood Preserve Charter, a clause that allowed any resident to demand a board clarification on a health-related citation. Petra had written it herself, likely assuming it would only ever be used to punish others. I invoked the clause with my full name: Lorian Graff, Unit 31. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days later in the Stonewood Community Center. I knew Petra wouldn't delay. She'd see it as her chance to reassert control, paint me as unstable, angry, grieving, irrational. She didn't know I'd already prepared the terrain. I spent the next day uploading anonymized packets of Petra's messaging into encrypted peer-review databases, not to leak them, but to timestamp them. Let the metadata live in multiple locations, traceable and independently validated. She could scream fabrication all she wanted. What mattered was verifiability. I wasn't just preparing a confrontation. I was preparing a collapse. That night, I visited Galen. The machines had been dialed down. His skin had returned to its color. His tiny chest rose and fell with steadier rhythm. Less whimper, more breath. The nurses had left a stuffed blue narwhal next to his pillow. I reached into my coat and pulled out the final piece, the original bottle Petra had tried to hide. I held it up and looked at my son. "You're going to grow up in a place that's safe," I said quietly, "even if I have to tear this one apart to build it." The next morning, I went to work. I reprogrammed the meeting hall's AV system to feed directly from my server using a custom secure handshake. No files on USBs, no cables to pull, no laptop to sabotage. When the time came, Petra's face would be played back to her in high resolution from a device she couldn't touch. I also looped in a failsafe. If the meeting feed cut or was interrupted, the video would be broadcast to the HOA-wide forum under the emergency update banner. No delay, no vote, no stopping. Everything was in place. Norland confirmed that he'd spoken to the county investigator and that the man had already received the archive. All that was left now was the trigger. Petra had made the rules. She'd written the policies. She'd crafted the theater of fear and compliance that held this community in her palm. And now she was going to step onto her own stage. But this time, I'd be controlling the lights. The Stonewood Community Center had always felt more like a presentation hall than a gathering space. Long, polished floors, sterile walls lined with framed photos of past board presidents, and a podium Petra had custom ordered to match her living room furniture. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and varnish, like someone had tried too hard to make it feel pure. Chairs were already lined up when I arrived. Most were empty, but I recognized a few faces, residents who'd received citations for noise, grass length, excessive wind chimes, and one couple Petra accused of overwatering. Quiet casualties. They nodded at me with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Norlin entered 5 minutes later, head low, shoulders squared. He didn't sit with the board. He chose a seat near the front, alone. At exactly 6 p.m., Petra Ulrich walked in like she owned the place. She wore a sage green pantsuit, the same color as her laminated violation slips, and a silver chain with a small key charm. She didn't look at me, didn't glance at Norlin, just approached the podium, adjusted the mic, and smiled like nothing in the world was wrong. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "This emergency clarification meeting has been called under Charter Clause 14B, which allows for a resident to request board comment on a wellness citation. We appreciate your civic engagement." She turned the page of her notes slowly, theatrically. "Before we begin, let me remind you that any audio or video recording of board proceedings must be authorized by the HOA leadership team and—" The screen behind her flickered to life. The room turned. Petra paused, hand frozen on her papers. It was the footage, my footage. The micro-lens angle from the cradle, high resolution, time-stamped, digitally stamped and watermarked. The room was silent as Petra's recorded hand entered the frame, set down her tote, and reached for the real bottle. Everyone could see the label. Everyone could see her swap it. The clipboard shield, the sleight of hand, the calm retreat. When the clip ended, I stood up. "My name is Lorian Graff. I'm the father of the infant in that footage. The bottle you just saw Petra Ulrich swap contained a formula later confirmed to be laced with unregulated herbal compounds known to cause acute liver damage in infants." Gasps echoed. One woman covered her mouth. Another man looked at Petra like she'd just taken a swing at his child. I stepped forward. "I submitted this footage and a full forensic report to a third-party lab, alongs with a toxicologist breakdown and digital logs verifying chain of custody. The bottle she placed on my table matched substances Petra previously promoted on our own HOA forums, ones she called natural cleansing substitutes." Petra's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Her jaw had tensed into something unreadable. I didn't give her the space to interrupt. "Additionally," I said, "I have records showing that this was not an isolated incident. Petra created and circulated internal documents encouraging ingredient swaps and discrete substitution during parental distraction. She advised residents, under the guise of health enforcement, to act without consent, without knowledge, and without legal basis." I turned toward the residents. "And she signed every one of those directives as HOA-approved policy." The screen lit up again, this time with the message from the burner account. Petra's own words, instructing another resident to attempt a distraction swap again. The headers were intact. The response timestamp matched her activity on the forum. The room erupted. Questions flew. Voices rose. Someone shouted from the back, "My daughter got sick last year. Was that you?" Another voice added, "She gave us a jar of tea and said it was mandatory." Petra held up her hands. "This is a smear campaign." "No," Norlin said, rising to his feet. "It's a reckoning." He held up the same envelope I'd handed him, the archive, sealed, signed, time-logged. "I've already submitted everything to the county health office and the district attorney. There's no saving this." Petra froze, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked small. Petra didn't speak for nearly 30 seconds. Her hands gripped the podium like she could anchor herself there, but the room had already shifted. The silence was heavier than shouting. Then she did exactly what I hoped she would do. "This is a manipulated witch hunt," she snapped. "All of this, these so-called messages, videos, none of them reflect official HOA policy. We have protocols, not mandates, and nothing I've done violates those protocols." I waited, letting her talk. "I have always operated under approved bylaws," she said, raising her voice now, addressing the crowd more than the board. "Everything I've done was in line with our health initiatives, community-first initiatives. The wellness standards were voted on, publicly and lawfully." Norlin stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "No, they weren't," he said. "Not once." Petra turned, stiff, cold. "Excuse me?" "I've been the vice president of this board for 4 years," he continued. "And in that time, you've authored and distributed over 40 policy documents that never saw a vote. I have handwritten notes from every meeting to prove it. You abused the board's silence as if it were consent." Petra laughed, bitterly. "Now you speak up, You've been silent for years. You're complicit." "No," Norlin replied, and he raised the envelope. "I was afraid. That doesn't make me complicit. That makes me human. But I'm done being afraid." The crowd murmured, louder this time. The board president beside Petra pushed his chair back and stood as well. Another followed, and another. "I'd like the record to show I was never informed of any supplement distribution protocols," said board member Rohn. "In fact, I was told not to speak about formula matters at all." The fourth board member, a woman in her 30s, stood next, holding her phone out. "We were told the wellness kits were optional suggestions, not swaps." Petra opened her mouth, but the moment had passed. The wall was breaking. Then the back door creaked open. Detective Elon Schultz stepped inside, not in uniform, but with the unmistakable posture of law enforcement. His badge hung visibly from his belt. He waited until the room quieted. "Petra Ulrich," he said calmly, "we need to speak with you regarding a criminal investigation into unauthorized administration of toxic substances to a minor." Every breath in the room halted. Petra stiffened. "I'm in the middle of a board meeting. I'm not here to disrupt your meeting. I'm here because a certified toxicology report, combined with digital and visual evidence, indicates that you intentionally replaced an infant's prescribed food supply with a substance known to cause liver failure. You'll have the opportunity to explain yourself in detail at the station." She glanced toward me then, no longer with power, but with something else. Recognition. She understood it was over. And then, finally, she said it. "I was trying to help." "That's what makes it worse," I replied. Two officers entered behind Schultz and approached her with care, reading her rights as she remained still. No cuffs yet, not until they got outside, but she didn't resist, didn't look at the board, or the residents, or Norlin, just straight ahead. They led her out through the rear exit, and the sound of the door shutting behind them felt like a page turning. I looked around the room. Neighbors still sat frozen. Some shook their heads. Others stared down at their laps. But slowly, voices started rising again, not angry, not scared, just processing. For the first time, it felt like the community was breathing without asking permission. Norlin walked over and placed the empty envelope back on the table. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we rebuild." I nodded. "Not with silence this time." "No," he agreed, "with truth." And for the first time in this neighborhood, that word actually meant something. The sun had dropped below the tree line when I stepped outside the community center. The breeze was sharper now, crisp against my skin, and the murmurs from the meeting room faded behind this double doors. What was once a sterile chamber of policy had turned into something real, messy, wounded, and finally awake. Petra was gone, taken into custody without resistance, without another word. But the damage she left behind still hung in the air, not just in legal terms, but in the lives she'd touched with her campaign of control. Word spread fast. By the time I reached the sidewalk, 3 neighbors I barely knew had already stopped me. One handed me a folded note. "Thank you for standing up when the rest of us didn't." Another said her child had also gotten sick from one of Petra's approved teas, but they hadn't made the connection until now. A third just nodded quietly, eyes glassy, and walked away. Norlin joined me on the path a minute later. He looked lighter, like something in his chest had finally let go. "They're already organizing an emergency re-election meeting," he said. "Rohn offered to step up as interim chair until a full vote can be held." "Good," I said. "But none of this gets buried. Petra's policies need to be erased, revoked, and reported. Every last one. They will be. I've already handed off the full server logs to the DA's office. And the county health commissioners launching a review of every HOA with wellness oversight policies in the state. We reached the edge of the greenbelt. The willow cradle's silhouette was visible from the road now, sitting alone on the porch under the soft yellow light. My chest tightened just looking at it. "She weaponized the very thing that should have protected us," I said. "Rules, standards, community. She used them to justify endangerment." Norlin nodded. "The system isn't broken. It's just not immune to people who see themselves as untouchable." The board had voted, during the final minutes of the meeting, to suspend all active citations issued under Petra's tenure. Every laminated notice, every forged mandate, every form of enforcement would be invalid by morning. An official apology would follow, though no apology would matter as much as prevention. I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. And I wanted safety. For Galen. For every child in that neighborhood. When I got home, I sat on the porch and watched the cradle sway gently in the wind. The camera inside it blinked once. Recording. Always recording. Inside the house, the server showed a steady green pulse. No breaches, no activity. I walked into Galen's room. His crib was freshly made, sheets soft and clean, no cables or hospital tape. Just the narwhal plush toy resting by the pillow. I stood there for a while, hand resting on the edge, letting the silence settle. He'd be home tomorrow. The doctors had cleared him for discharge. His liver enzyme levels were dropping, his color returning. They said he'd heal completely, but that he'd need follow-ups. I would keep every appointment, every test, every scan. He was never going to face this. All world unguarded again. Later that night, I got a message on my private work line. It was from Schultz. Investigation extended. Additional wellness incidents reported by 2 families. DA moving forward with formal charges. Reckless endangerment, practicing medicine without a license, criminal fraud, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm. I stared at the screen, not because I didn't expect it, but because something inside me finally exhaled, slowly, deeply. This wasn't just a personal victory anymore. It was a reckoning others would benefit from. I backed up every last file again, just in case, stored it on cold drives, cloud servers, and mailed a copy to a public interest legal group. Petra had relied on silence. I'd built a wall of evidence so loud it couldn't be ignored. The next morning, the laminated citations were gone from every door. Even the grass seemed greener without her shadow over it. Galen came home just after noon. The sky was overcast, the kind of quiet gray that made everything feel softer. The nurses handed him to me, with practiced hands, but even they paused when they saw how tightly I held him. His weight was different now, not in pounds, but in meaning. I carried him through the front door like it was the first time all over again. The willow cradle sat exactly where it always had, beside the table Petra once used as her stage. I stood over it for a long time, before gently placing Galen down inside. He blinked up at me, eyes steady, mouth curled just slightly. Not a smile, not yet, but the beginning of one. He was safe, and this time, everyone knew why. The board's emergency vote was finalized by the afternoon. Petra was officially removed from all HOA leadership roles. Her authority revoked, her access terminated. A letter signed by the remaining board members went out to every household, publicly acknowledging the serious violations of trust and health oversight that occurred during her tenure. It didn't name her, it didn't have to. Everyone knew. Neighbors who used to keep their heads down had begun speaking up. A father on Elmwood posted a video on the community forum showing Petra's suggested teas from last year, including one labeled cleansing decoction, the same phrase used in the digital files she tried to erase. Another mother submitted a statement that her child's allergic reaction in February matched the toxic markers found in Galen's blood work. The investigation expanded, quietly, systemically. And the platform Petra once used to exert control was now a library of evidence, indexed, submitted, permanent. The DA's office confirmed it would pursue charges not just for Galen, but for every documented case linked to her interventions. The charges included endangerment, unlawful medical conduct, and, because of the messages she'd sent, intent to distribute harmful substances. She'd face trial. Her empire, built on fear and jargon, had collapsed under its own weight. Norland stopped by that evening. He stood on the edge of my porch with his hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the cradle rocking behind me. She really thought it would hold, he said. The whole system, the silence, the control. It always holds, I replied. Until someone documents the truth. He nodded, then looked down at Galen, still sleeping, safe and undisturbed. I'm sorry I didn't act sooner, he added. You acted when it mattered. He gave me a folded slip of paper, his formal resignation letter from the HOA board. I didn't argue. He'd done more than enough. I placed it in the house next to the archive drive I duplicated again that morning. It was done. The work, the exposure, the reckoning. It was all done. But what lingered wasn't vengeance. It was relief. Stonewood Preserve changed after that. The bylaws were revised, the health clauses stripped, rewritten. then submitted for legal review by a third-party compliance attorney. The platform Petra built was permanently disabled, and an open vote was passed to prevent any future board member from enacting unilateral policy decisions without public notice and approval. The neighborhood got quieter, but not with fear, with peace. Galen stirred later, blinking toward the skylight above his crib. I sat beside him, one hand on the edge of the cradle, the other resting gently over his chest. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. He was home, and no one would ever touch his world without going through me again. That's the promise I made, not with words, but with action, with evidence, with follow-through. Petra thought the HOA shielded her. She didn't know I had a server running 24 hours a day. She didn't know I built evidence chains for a living. She didn't know a father with nothing left to lose is the last person you try to intimidate. She knows now. And now? So does everyone else. Subscribe and don't miss what we reveal next. Some truths need more than attention. They need consequences. Tell me in the comments. What's your story of HOA overreach? And how did you fight back?